All right, well, this week we're going to keep going. This is our last week learning about what the Ohlone used to survive. Today we're going to talk about the different things that men and women did to help with the tribe. So you'll need these supplies, once again, your markers, your pencil, and your notebook. And I'm going to go ahead and zip ahead. I've got my map. I've got my Ohlone facts with the homes. Here's what I did, the food, and what the men did. And then last week we talked about special skills and special talents. I have a little bit of space at the bottom, so I'm going to continue on page 5. If you don't, feel free to go to page 6. Please do not go to page 7. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the women did. So I'm going to put women and girls in a box here. Women and girls. I might have to go on a little bit to the next page, but that's okay. All right, so here's what I'm talking about. I'm going to put that in a box just to show exactly what I'm talking about here. So let's talk a little bit about what the women wore. And again, I think I will make myself a little box here so I can draw in that box. And let's talk about their clothing. Let's talk about their clothing, okay? What did women wear? All right, well, the first thing they would wear was a skirt that was made of deer skin and tree bark. Okay, so first things first, clothing. They had skirts made of deer skin and bark. Deer skin and bark. They also had beautiful necklaces. Okay, beautiful necklaces made of pine beads and abalone shells. Abalone shells are a beautiful shell that have like a rainbow color on the inside, and they would break the shells apart to make beads. Okay, so they had deer skin and bark skirts with abalone shells in their necklaces. Now, because they had so many beautiful things, they would often trade those things with other tribes for other goods. All right, so let's talk about what they would trade. So I'm going to put right here, trade. They would trade. They had their beads and shells, right? Their beads and shells. They would trade the beads and shells for obsidian. Do you remember what they used obsidian for? That was for the arrowheads, right? They would trade for the obsidians with the Yokuts, the Yokut tribe. So they'd say, hey, I'll take some beads, I'll give you some obsidian, and then you'll have arrowheads. All right. They would also trade their beads and shells for other types of beads, for clam beads with the pomo. And remember, the pomo were up north. And they would also trade their beads and shells for baskets. Now, they had their own baskets that they made, but sometimes it's fun to get something different. And the pomo also would make beautiful baskets. So they could trade what they had with other tribes to get different things. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and draw the skirt and the necklace. I'm going to use my yellow and brown markers. All right, my yellow and brown, I'm going to put that right here in this square here. Okay, and so I could draw the skirt, kind of a trapezoid shape, right? And it would wrap around, almost like your bath towel wraps around. All right, and then there were always these like ropes and shells and things hanging down like a belt. Okay, and the skirt was made of deer skin, which they would, they'd hunt the deer and then they would skin the animal and dry the skin. And then they could soften it and wear it and stay warm and mostly clean. So that is a skirt. They wore other things too, but these were just some of the main things to highlight. And then of course, the beautiful necklaces. So I'm gonna draw a nice oval here, and I'm gonna add some different color or different beads. Now they weren't all brown. A lot of them were white and blue and other beautiful colors. And this is a necklace, and they often wore more than one. Okay, so that's what the women wore, and they also traded. Okay, now we have a few more things to say about the ladies, but I have run out of space. You can see I'm all out of space on my page, so I'm gonna go ahead and go to page 6, the back of page 5. So here's page 6, okay? Well, we've talked about this before, that the women were gatherers, all right? But what did they gather? Okay, they gathered food by the season. Right? They can't be collecting the same thing all year long unless it grows all year long. So they gathered food by the season. Okay, so let's talk about that as it goes. So in fall and winter, they gathered acorns. And they had to gather enough to last through their other seasons. Okay, in the spring, that's when they were gathering roots and tubers, those onions and wild potatoes. And then in the summertime, they were gathering seeds and grass, edible grasses. They were gathering seeds and edible grasses. And now I'm going to take my markers and I'm going to illustrate some of those things, just because when I take notes, I like to have lots of art to go with it to make it interesting. So I'll draw a few acorns. Start there. Draw a few acorns. All right, there's my acorns. And then roots and tubers. So that's going to be things like onions, carrots, potatoes, and other roots. All right, so I'm gonna need a couple color markers here. Let's start with just basic roots that are green. You guys have seen roots. They grow down. They're kind of crazy and stringy, right? So there's some roots. Then we can draw a little carrot, because carrots are a naturally occurring plant. You don't have to buy them in a bag at Target. Right, so there's a carrot. Then there are naturally occurring potatoes. That's a tuber. And then, of course, onions. Wild onions. Wild onions. Okay, so that's what they would gather in the spring. And then in the summer, they're gathering seeds. Just gonna put some different seeds here. And grasses to eat. Not a lot grows in the summer when there's no rain, right? So women had a very important set of skills. They were traders and they were gatherers, massively helpful to the tribe, okay? Let's talk a little bit about what the men wore and what the men did to contribute, okay? So I'm gonna put over here on page 6, men dash boys. Okay, because it's not like they did something different when they were younger. Nope, they still had jobs to do even when they were little. Okay, so men and boys, what did they wear? Okay, what was their clothing? All right, well, their clothing was pretty minimal. They wore deerskin. Okay, so the ladies had that kind of longer skirt situation, all right? Men wore more of a kind of a short area just to cover up their bottoms. So if we look at these people here, we can see it's like a skirt, but it's a little bit shorter than the ladies, okay? They wore deer skin. But their skill, you know, they weren't making baskets or gathering. Their skill was hunting, right? And when they were hunting, they actually wore different clothing than when they were just kind of wandering around the village, okay? Well, how did they learn how to hunt? Okay, they learned how to hunt through stories. Remember, it's not like they had books. It wasn't a written language. So they had to listen to the stories to know what to do. So they learned hunting skills through stories. They learned hunting skills through stories, okay? And it's not like they had to wait till they turned 15 and then they learned. No, they started learning to hunt at a young age, at about 4 and up. Okay, so I'm going to use a dash here, and I'm going to say learned to hunt at a young age. All right, with squirrels and rabbits. Those were the things that young boys hunted. Squirrels and rabbits. They'd have to start using a bow and arrow and practice on those things. It's good practice because those things move quickly. Okay, but when they got older, they hunted elk and deer. So hunted elk and deer when older. All right, and before they would hunt, they would visit the sweat lodge. Remember that? Or the sweat house? We talked about that as one of their types of houses. They'd visit the sweat house before a hunt to sweat off their human smell. They wanted to be as stinky as possible so that animals wouldn't smell them in the air and go, oh, there's a human nearby, and run away. Okay, so they'd sweat off the human smell. Okay, now men, when you went hunting, I remember how I said you would wear different clothes. I'm going to show you what those clothes look like. We're actually going to draw it. What they would do is, think about it now, right? Like when people go hunting now, they wear camouflage. They try to blend in. Well, they didn't have camouflage then, so what they would do is if somebody hunted a deer, they would take the skin off the deer, they'd dry it, and then the men would put, after it was dried, they'd put that skin on. The head, the hat, the antlers and everything, so that if an animal saw them, they would look like another animal and they wouldn't run away. And they were disguised as deer while they hunted. So I've got some nice space down here, and I'm gonna go ahead and draw what that looks like. Okay, so I'm just gonna use a stick figure. All right, so here we have the body and the legs and the arms. All right, and here's the mouth, but remember how I said they would wear that deer skin? So they'd have the kind of the nose of the deer skin over their face like this, and then here's the top of it, kind of covering. They could still see, they'd have little holes and so they could see through. And then here would be the antlers coming off, right? And then the skin is hanging down all around like this, so that if they were crouching on the ground, if an animal saw them, they would look like another deer, which isn't nearly as scary as seeing a human with a bow and arrow, right? So they were disguised as deer for hunting. Okay, they didn't like paint their faces or anything, but they'd go to the sweat house, they'd sweat off that human smell, and then they would put on that deer pelt, that deer skin, the head part of it, so that they would be disguised. The animals wouldn't be afraid. All right, thanks, friends.